Do you enjoy the harvest of Missouri through food, fuel, or fiber? Interested in strengthening your community or making a difference in the lives of others? You're in the right place. This is Stand for Ag with Missouri Farmers Care. Join us for thoughtful conversations around the intersections of farmer, rancher, and consumer interests. Grab a seat, press play, and join the conversation.
Welcome back to this episode of Stand for Ag with Missouri Farmers Care. We're thrilled you've tuned in again, and I'm particularly excited about the conversation that we're getting ready to have. We have a panel of agricultural women, leaders in their own right, in their own respective areas of ag, and individuals that really have stepped out in a leadership role through Missouri CommonGround in an effort to talk about common myths, misperceptions, misinformation, and really deliver farm truths. So there's a lot here, whether you're on the consumer side of the plate or the producer side. We're just excited for this conversation. To introduce our guests today, we have Hillary Black. She is the Associate Director of Communications with the Missouri Corn Growers Association and the Missouri Corn Merchandising Council. Hillary, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We're excited to be here today.
Yes, I am excited to have Hill. This is the first time she has been on Stand for Ag, but we are longtime colleagues. We worked together for well over a decade at Missouri Corn. She is occupying my office at Missouri Corn. And so it's good to see her every time that we get together at Corn. We also have two veterans of our podcast. We have Addi Yoder, who you may remember has been on once or twice at least, with her husband Jocelyn when they were recipients of the Leopold Conservation Award for Missouri 2 years ago. Welcome, Addi.
Thank you.
Thank you. And she was also joined us for the Greater Missouri Leadership Challenge with our other guest, Kaitlin Flick, when we had a conversation with executive level women, not from outside of agriculture, from across the state, up in our shop in Northeast Missouri, and just got to have one of the most, I think, enriching conversations that I get to have with consumers throughout the year. Kaitlin, welcome to Stand for Ag.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes, we're glad to have you both. So Hillary is going to play guest host today on this episode. She leads the Common Ground effort as part of a coalition in the state of Missouri. And she knows best. She works with the leaders through Common Ground, of which Kaitlin and Addi are just a selection of them, and really knows this program inside and out. So Hill, I'm going to kick this to you and let's dig in.
That sounds great. I'm glad you trust me because being my first podcast ever and getting to guest host feels kind of like a little bit of pressure on my shoulders, but I'm excited to shoulder it today. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, Common Ground started at the national level with the National Corn Growers Association in partnership with state corn and soy organizations. And our goal is to partner up with ladies on the farm and have them share their message with consumers. So we take a lot of time listening to concerns, common myths, questions about what happens on the farm, how food is produced, even to what does your farm look like? How is it set up? Is it family? Lots of questions just about how agriculture functions as a whole. And our goal is to be inclusive and positive, hear those concerns, hear those questions, and really share our personal experience to help answer those questions. And so my job is fun. I get to work with these fantastic ladies who have these wonderful stories to tell. So we've been doing this for about, I think the program in itself has been around 8 years. Missouri Corn has been involved for about 6. So we've had Addi basically since the get-go and Kaitlin for probably the last 5 years. So they know what they're doing. They have awesome stories and do a great job of sharing ag stories. So to kick things off, I'm going to let each of you kind of give a little intro of your farm, where you're at, what you do, and maybe your why as to you got involved in Common Ground. And because you have been on in the past, people might be familiar. So maybe anything that's been new in the last year or so, or I know Addi, you've got exciting things happening as of yesterday on the farm. So Addi, why don't you go first?
Hi, I'm Addi Yoder. Thanks for having me back. It's an honor and a privilege to get to be be a representative for Common Ground and for Missouri Farmers Care and Missouri Corn always. So I'm excited to be here. I say we, my husband and I and his family, we grow corn and soybeans in Shelby County, Missouri. And we also have a cattle backgrounding operation and a crop insurance business. And I got into Common Ground several years ago when I had a little sideline in health and fitness. I cared very much and still do about what I feed my family and what I put into my body and my health and all of those things. And so when I was in that space, I had a lot of conversations with other women who were in health and fitness and not in agriculture. And in having those conversations and just listening to other moms talk about how deeply they cared about the food that they eat and how it was grown and where it came from, I heard a lot of things that I knew didn't match up to what we did here on the farm every day and to what I knew happened with all of the really good people that I know in agriculture. And I took those conversations and I would bring a lot of those questions to my husband and we would talk through them. And I would sometimes get frustrated because I'm like, I know that there's something that I can share, but I don't know how to do it in a way without saying like, hey, you're wrong, because that's not nice and people don't like to hear that. So I started looking for different avenues to help share my message. I started sharing stories about what we were doing on the farm on my social media. And when I found Common Ground, it was just the most natural fit for where I was at in wanting to have those conversations with other moms and women. And so it helped me to learn how to better communicate our story and to ask questions and to be thoughtful and to listen. And so that I can get to the root of what women really want to know and help bridge that gap, because that 1 to 2 generations that most people are removed from the farm is a bigger gap than what it sounds. And so having that person who has kids and reads books and works out and is just like everyone else that they can safely ask questions to has been super valuable and important into me being able to again bridge that gap. And she says exciting things are happening on our farm because we started planting corn yesterday, and it's very exciting because if you follow me anywhere, you know that corn is my favorite thing. And so it makes me so happy when baby corns come up in the spring, and we just can't wait.
Yeah, and I think you hit on something really good there that I didn't mention. One of the best things about Common Ground, and it's in the name, is that I think our volunteers are really good about not only sharing their stories on the farm, but using what's going on in their day-to-day lives to connect with other moms and food purchasers who may have similar interests or similar situations. So by, with Addi sharing her love of books, she might connect with somebody in another state, in another region of the country that may not know a lot about corn farming, but maybe reading a similar book to what Addi likes. So I think that's one of the cool things, is that we're able to use those everyday things around us to really connect with consumers. So Kaitlin has a much different scenario from Addi, which is also cool. And we have had Kaitlin around, gosh, she's only been in Common Ground for about 5 years, but we snagged her when she was in college and had her as an intern, and just really appreciate all that she does. So Kaitlin, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everybody. It's great to be back on the podcast. My name is Kaitlin Flick. Like Hillary said, I started working with Missouri Corn back when I was a college student at University of Missouri. Did a couple internships at Missouri Corn, and I'm really thankful for that time there. And so I am able to work with the Common Ground group and Missouri Corn a little bit differently than Addi. I'm not a mom, I'm not married, but I do come from a farm family, and my family farms around the Augusta, Missouri area, right where Warren, Franklin, and St. Charles County meet. So back in the late 1800s, my great-grandparents started the farmstead there, and my family's been in the same spot farming since the late 1800s, which is a really cool story to share. So we raise corn, soybeans, wheat, a few dairy cows, and beef cattle too. So the beef cattle has been one of my favorite things about the farm. I'm extremely passionate about sharing my story of raising cattle with consumers and debunking a lot of those myths that go on in the cattle industry. So aside from farm work and being involved with the family organization, being involved with the family farm, I work off the farm in agriculture, and I work for a company called Syngenta Crop Protection. I work with farmers on pesticide applications, just trying to put together a crop protection portfolio to meet their needs based off of what insects or diseases or weeds they have in their field.
And Kaitlin, I have to tell you, I super appreciate that about you because while I can talk a lot about farming and agriculture, when it gets down to that agronomic level, you're over my head on some of that. So it's fantastic when we get questions on certain topics that we have some real experts that we can go to that not only are doing it on their farm, but have literally been trained in that arena to make sure that we are using the safest practices and most efficient practices on the farm. So now that we know a little bit more about you guys, let's talk a little bit more about Common Ground. We just wrapped up probably one of the biggest events of the year a couple weeks ago, which is the Herman Wine Trail partnership. We have a one-day wine trail event in Herman called the Farmers Table Wine Trail. Just one of you want to take a stab at explaining how we go about sharing agriculture that day? Addi?
Oh, I can do that. The wine trail is one of my favorite events. So Herman is one of my favorite places to visit anyway. My husband and I use it as like our little weekend getaway spot. It's a winery town along the Missouri River, kind of on the St. Louis side of the state. And because it's a winery town, they have this built-in wine trail system where the community has come together and the wineries work together to create a trail. I mean, I don't really know any other word to say it, where on specific weekends throughout the year, they have a theme, and each of the selected wineries on the trail will cook a recipe based on what the theme is. So our theme is the Farmers Table Wine Trail. And so each winery involved in the wine trail is a different farm product. So I was at the corn stop, Kaitlin was at the beef stop, there was a poultry stop and an apple stop. And so different farm product recipe is cooked at each station, and then the winery pairs it with a tasting of wine from their specific winery. And because the Herman has this wine trail system set up and they do other themes throughout the year, people know to come and look for it. So it's a built-in opportunity for us to get the opportunity to talk to people from off the farm, from different communities across the state and in other states, because getting to Herman is relatively easy for people in lots of different ways, using the highways or train or whatever. So they come to the wine trail because they already know and like Herman, and they want this reason to go to all the wineries with this ticket. And then they get the added bonus of having a farmer there on that specific day. So for me, we have a cardboard cutout and a cute little video. And so the cardboard cutout is a big conversation piece for me because, one, I think they're hilarious, but two, people like them. And so it always starts a conversation about, oh, well, that's you. Yes, that's me. And then, talking about how I'm a corn farmer and visually from the outside, I don't know that I always appear to look like a corn farmer. So then there's an element of surprise there too. And it's just an easy way to talk about corn and farming and what we do, and to put a face to this, this intangible crop that's in the grocery store in tortilla chips or in ethanol in our cars, and have conversations without it being pushy. It's natural and it's easy and it's fun and the atmosphere is good. And it's just a great way and situation to have some of those conversations.
Yeah, and that's really why we decided to pair up with them. Is one of our goals was go to where the people already are, go to where they're comfortable, go to where they're already thinking about food and wine and having their questions, and it just being a positive, friendly atmosphere to spark that conversation, because our main goal is basically to become a resource. If you have a food question, instead of finding a random source on the internet, why don't you ask a farmer who's actually out in the field producing it? And so that has been a huge goal of the trail, and we really enjoy getting to have those conversations. Kaitlin, you were at a completely different winery. You were talking about beef. What kind of questions were you guys talking about out there?
Yeah, I had a lot of great great questions from consumers. Everything from what do you feed your animals? How often do you feed them? What does it look like for nutrition standards for beef cattle? And then questions about antibiotics. Do they get growth hormones? Do they get antibiotics? Consumers hear so much, especially with labeling, right? They hear so much about no antibiotics in this product, or there are antibiotics in animals. And having that conversation with those consumers about the antibiotics that I do use with my cattle herd and why I use that and the amounts that I do use was really beneficial to be able to talk to them about some of the different, treatments for animals and why it's important to have healthy animals. Therefore, they have healthy food, and assuring them that as a producer, I'm not going to administer unnecessary antibiotics if it's not needed. It's money out of my pocket. If the animal doesn't need it, I wouldn't do that. So a lot of good questions around nutrition, antibiotic usage, and even just living facilities for the animals. I think in this world, we hear a lot about CAFOs and confinement for animals. And what does that look like? They wanted to know where my cattle were raised, how they were raised, and what that lifestyle looked like for them.
Yeah. One thing I don't think even Addi and Kaitlin know is we take a survey during the wine trail. And one of the questions we ask is what did you learn most about today? And we give them a whole list of topics that we know the volunteers are either talking about or that they're covering in the pre-recorded videos that are also available to watch throughout the trail. And the most common answer for the last 2 years has been sustainability, which hasn't technically been the overall talking point of a lot of the videos, but definitely a theme that I feel like in agriculture, we naturally weave within all of our stories. I know that has been important to you guys, Addi, but how do you kind of explain that in a way that consumers can really understand it? Because it's such a big, kind of broad term. How do you kind of break that down to where they understand what you're talking about?
It is a big, broad term, and there are so many different things that we do on our farm, between water quality testing and cover crops and no-till and whatnot. That I try to start with the basics and most common things. So if they ask about conservation or they ask about, are you doing anything? I from time to time get questions about carbon, because that's a big topic in row crops in particular. And I start with cover crops. We want to keep the soil as healthy as possible. That's our main priorities. If we can keep the soil healthy, if we can keep it rich and doing all of the things that it should all of the time, not only does it keep that land in place and healthy and as it should be for my children's children, it just makes good sense. Depleting the soil and not taking care of the soil it's honestly bad business. And I always hate talking about it as a business because it's more part of our heart than it is a business, but it also pays our bills. And so if we are not taking care of the land or we're putting on things that we don't need, just like Kaitlin said, we're not going to put things in the ground or on the crop that aren't necessary because it costs money. And so a lot of times sustainability is stuff that we're doing anyway. And it's easy to forget that we do it because it's just so natural. But then when we get asked it, it's easy to say, yes, absolutely. We put cover crops on and then we chop that cover crop and feed it to the cattle. So it's multi-purpose all of the time. We multitask just like moms do.
Yeah. And you actually just hit on a couple of things that I think are important to that sustainability discussion and what a lot of consumers may key in on that we don't necessarily think about being directly tied to sustainability, but that is that family component and how important it is to so many farmers, not only to take care of the land so that it is producing a good quality crop, but also taking care of the farm and the land so that it can be passed down to the next generation. And also clarifying that it may be a corporation, but that doesn't mean that it's not the family that in that corporation, that it's set up that way for business purposes, but it's still the family behind it. But you definitely have some little farmers on your farm that are ready to come back, it sounds like. And so I know that that is very important to you guys. And Ashley and I were just talking about how at 8 years old, you've got one that is very upset that he has to go to college in a few years.
Yes. Yesterday on the first day planting, and I actually didn't put this together. I was just so busy that I didn't think about it. Hillary actually put it together. That yesterday when my son got up, he cried for like 20 minutes. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is wrong with you? Like, why are you being so dramatic? And he said, I'm just going to have to leave in 5 to 10 years. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, it was morning and I was doing the bus and getting kids where they needed to be so I could get out the door. And when I was telling Hillary about it later, she's like, it's the first day of planting. He's freaking out because he's sad that he's going to miss out on all of this. And I told him, I was like, okay, listen, go get dressed and brush your teeth. When you get off the bus, call your dad and we can get you to the field and you could play corn. And he was fine after that. He was fine. So yes, he actually told his grandpa last fall that he was not going to go to college at all because he needed to come home and farm all day, every day.
Yeah. And so I think that stories like that other people can relate to and see how passionate, even at 8 years old, your kid is to come back and farm and do what his dad and his grandpa are doing and be a good steward of that land. So I think while we don't always necessarily talk about it in a very direct sense, that is one way that we're kind of weaving that message throughout. Now, it's not just Common Ground that you girls are involved in. You are very active when it comes to agriculture. And so, Kaitlin, you just want to give us a rundown of what else you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm honored to be on the CCA board this year, which the CCA is the Certified Crop Advisors. And I sit on the CCA board along with a lot of other people in the agronomy industry. And I'm also the chairwoman of the Cooper County Extension Council, the Mizzou Cooper County Extension Council. That's an honor to lead that organization and fight for agriculture here in Central Missouri.
Mm-hmm. And check out those listeners who haven't had a chance. Right at the beginning of the year, Kaitlin was also a guest on Stand for Ag with the CCAs, talking about positioning ourselves well on our farm. So kind of a shop talk episode, positioning ourselves well on the farm to have that technical advice that we need. Jocelyn, I've heard him say over and over, Addi, that it's the team and the network behind us that make the innovations that we do on the farm possible, because we're pooling all the expertise of those that have a vested interest in our farm. We're ultimately the decision makers, but it's the expertise from CCAs and all of the input suppliers that he relies on and others rely on. So Kaitlin dove deep with a team of CCAs on that topic right at the beginning of the year that we'll link in the show notes so that those haven't seen it, want to hear more about what CCAs and Kaitlin does on a regular basis, that'll be available.
Now, something that Addi is currently doing and Kaitlin has already graduated from is the Corn Roots Leadership Academy. So not only do we get to work with them through Common Ground, but also in Corn Roots. And one of the big focuses of that program is talking policy and talking with legislators and getting comfortable having conversations, not just with consumers, but with elected officials, so that when problems come up or there's something being debated that can impact our farm back at home, that they have the tools necessary to go into those offices and feel confident. So Addi, you want to talk a little bit about what you guys are doing? And then both of you had the opportunity to come to the Capitol yesterday. So any thoughts after spending the day in Jefferson City from either of you?
One thing that I always leave Jefferson City with is how similar our work in Common Ground is to what we do in the Capitol. It's very parallel, because a lot of times the people that we talk to in the Capitol have a completely different life than I do. And it's so beneficial to them to meet someone with a face from the farm, like to be able to say, oh, that farmer is impacted by this policy in that way. as opposed to just, like the people that work for us that do policy are fantastic, but they're the people they see every day. So having someone come in who has actual feet on the ground experience in those areas with stories and ways to apply that policy to their real life is super valuable. But the communication is very similar, being able to take these high level terms that we use every day and to step them back to be able to say, this is why I do this, and this is what it means to us, and this is how it impacts us in this way. And also maintain that positivity, that inclusiveness. The standards of expectation and the ways that we communicate are very parallel. And it's always very rewarding to go and to see that impact made at the Capitol.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to piggyback off of what Addi said, I mean, the conversations are so great to have, and you got to find your common ground with yesterday talking with the senators, you have to find your common ground with them to lead that conversation and open up. And, for example, we were meeting with Senator Sandy Crawford. We talked about the lack of women senators. And then Addi and I were able to talk about needing more women in agriculture, right? And we were able to relate on that common ground issue and then expand our conversation even deeper and get our message across. Like Addi, I love to bring the farm perspective and share about how the policy decisions are impacting us on the farm, but how it also impacts rural Missouri and rural economic development. That's so important for our small farming communities to be able to continue on for banks, schools, businesses, roads, highways, bridges. What they do in Jeff City impacts everybody, not just the farmer, but everybody in rural Missouri.
We were talking about it at the nail salon this morning about going to Jeff City yesterday and the conversations that we had, and about the policies that we talked about at the Capitol. And the lady that's doing my nails and the lady that does hair in the other chair, we were all talking about it, and they're like, but it affects all of us. Like if Addi is not making money on the farm because of this opportunity not being there and that opportunity not being there, yes, it impacts the grocery store, but it also impacts whether or not I can get my nails done. Yeah. Just little stuff like that you don't think that the trickle down matters, but it impacts literally everyone.
Absolutely. And what I like to always talk about with policymakers is how ethanol plants impact rural Missouri, the amount of jobs that it provides and revenue for rural Missouri. People that don't have a farm to come back to in rural Missouri, they don't have a lot of opportunities for employment. And that's why we see them moving to cities and populations of rural Missouri decreasing. I want to keep my small towns thriving. And so having those conversations about small business tax credits and ethanol and how that works to keep people employed in rural Missouri with great jobs, great jobs that have benefits, good opportunities for promotions, and support their community.
I always think about that trickle down, that multiplier effect of money staying in our economies, Kaitlin. I just read an article this morning about gas prices. Pressure's still high. Pressures at the pump is still high, even though crude oil is off. And I just think about us exporting our wealth as a country it was about Russian fuel prices and pressure, to Russia, to other Middle Eastern countries, and how much the impact of making that choice for ethanol or biodiesel or an American made fuel keeps that money multiplying in our economy everywhere, rather than exporting our wealth. It's a personal passion of mine, but I was thinking that as I was reading, every dollar we keep here reverberates through our economy. And it's such a powerful multiplier effect, particularly in rural areas.
I always like to, create the analogy. Everyone wants to buy American made clothing, right? If they see it made in America, they want to purchase that item. So why not for fuel also? If it's grown here in the Midwest, don't you want to support your neighboring corn farmer and produce your fuel? Supply your fuel from your homeland.
Yep.
You see why these are like some of my favorite programs to work on. Absolutely fantastic ways of connecting with people. But speaking of a multiplier effect, it takes more than just a handful of common ground volunteers to go out and spread agriculture's message. It takes, more than just the crew we have in the Capitol. It takes more than the staff that all of ag kind of has collectively to get out there and get these messages across. So what is your best advice for people who, whether they want to be online, whether they want to communicate with their friends, whether they want to communicate with consumers, or whether they want to get more involved in policy, what tips and tricks or advice would you give them as they're kind of dipping their toe into that first foray of being a louder advocate?
Kaitlin, do you want to lead?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I would recommend, I mean, just getting in touch with your state associations and looking at what do you truly have a passion for? What do you have to bring and share about? And what are you passionate about sharing your messaging? What is your messaging? And getting in touch with your state organizations and reaching out to them, asking them how you can be helpful by sharing your story.
I second that motion. I absolutely think that you need to think about how to narrow your focus more than anything. I think it's easy to be like, I love farming. And then you talk about your cattle and you talk about your soybeans, you talk about your corn, and you talk about hunting, you talk about all of these things, but it's easier for people to ask you things when you have a narrower focus. So if I have questions about beef, I'm 100% texting Kaitlin. I'm also texting her about specific agronomy questions. For example, I have a daughter in high school who is very focused on agronomy. And I was like, hey, why don't you meet my friend Kaitlin, woman in agronomy, who would be able to answer your questions as to what that's like. If someone sees me on the internet, they come to me with questions about corn or the sprayer and sometimes conservation. They don't ask me about soybeans. They don't ask me about cattle. If they do, then I send them somewhere else. But having that narrow focus of what I need to know, one, clears out my brain. Then I don't feel like I need to be an expert in all the things all the time. I'm certainly not an expert of corn, but I love it enough to find the information and learn myself and ask questions. But then I get to get all the benefits of being the lady who loves corn, right? So I get people who send me pictures of corn in Germany and corn in South Carolina and recipes with corn. And they ask me if their sweet corn is growing appropriately. And I don't know the answers to all of these things, but it's very exciting to know that that's what they think. Like if they see corn, they think Addi. And I love that. It makes me so happy to know that they have a safe place they can go with those pictures and those questions and those things. When they go to the grocery store and see an ear of corn, they think of me.
I would also add to what Addi said. She hit the nail right on the head with networking, right? Like you have to know your network and who's an expert in that specific area that you have a question about. It's all about who you know and utilizing your resources.
And I think that's another big key to Common Ground is that we have, while it's corn and soy that is kind of leading the charge from an organizational standpoint, we take ladies from all aspects of agriculture to answer questions. We've got dairy producers, we have pork producers, we have poultry growers. We've got kind of the whole gamut. And so while Addi and Kaitlin might be on today, and it's awesome if you want to connect with them, if you have a question that they can't answer, they have that network to go to, and we can get answers from across the board, even though Kaitlin might not have chickens and Addi may not have hogs. Kylie and Lauren and Kate may be able to answer some of those questions. So I think that's part of the beauty of the program is, and not only do we have Missouri, we have all across the US. So there's such a wide range of topics that we can cover. And we invite everyone to go check out the organization at findourcommonground.com. You can also, from that webpage, you can see who volunteers in Missouri. You can figure out how to contact Addi. You can figure out how to contact Kaitlin, and see who else is in the program and what they are producing on their farm. We also invite you to reach out to state staff if you want to be involved. We're always looking for volunteers to be a part of the program, because as we mentioned, it takes all of us to kind of get that messaging out there and to answer those questions. So we're excited to connect. And before we go, I want to give both of you one last opportunity to hit on anything else advocacy related that you guys are doing, or ways that people can connect with you?
So thank you for having me today. It was an honor and I enjoyed chatting with you guys. I would say consumers, anyone with questions, please feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Kaitlin Flick, Kaitflick. And so feel free to reach out to me via Instagram. I love to promote my farm story and even my agronomic story too. I love to let consumers know what's going on in the field and what's being applied to crops when and how my cattle are being raised. And you'll see all types of pictures on the farm, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything. So please feel free to reach out. I would love to answer any questions or just connect with you. We might have something in common. You might love cattle as much as I do. I'd love to connect over that and share our stories.
And she shares the most beautiful vegetables.
Thank you. Thank you. Still learning.
Watching your garden.
Vegetable growing, it's, I'll share this really quick. When I started off as an agronomist with MFA in ag retail, before I came to Syngenta, I would go on calls to corn and soybean fields, and I would be able to answer the question, talk about corn growth, how herbicides work. And then someone would say, can you look at my garden? What's this doing to my cucumbers? And I was lost. So I really started gardening on the side just as a fun hobby, but corn and soybeans and wheat are definitely my specialty. I tell my family that all the time when they ask me, well, why aren't your tomatoes growing? So
I think it's fun to see them, mostly because I have 2 black thumbs and can't grow vegetable to save my life. So it's fun to see other people's success in those areas. You can find me on Instagram as well at Addi.Yoder. It's ADDIE.YODER. Or I'm on Facebook too, the same name, different location.
And I would just encourage anyone, if you have questions about how your food is grown, how it's raised, how it's processed, please reach out to us. We would love to talk to you and share our story. The best way to get answers is going directly to the producer.
And these volunteer producers do a great job from a personal perspective. It's as straight from the horse's mouth as you can get. It's straight. It's a story straight from the farm, unfiltered. And so we certainly appreciate that and appreciate Missouri Corn, Soy, and other national partners making this infrastructure possible so that we do a better job of telling our stories, right? We're not changing the story. We're just doing a better job channeling the stories so that we get to connect on a broader audience.
Absolutely. I may be trained in how to write a press release and know quite a bit about a broad spectrum of a lot of things, but I can't give you that hands-on perspective because I'm not out there in the field doing it. So to be able to pick up the phone and text or call and say, hey, I have a question, or hey, we need to get in the Capitol and visit with legislators, or hey, we're going to Herman, we need to talk to consumers. It's absolutely fantastic to have willing volunteers who take time away from the farm and away from their jobs in order to answer those questions and connect, because we know how important it is to get those messages out. So we appreciate both of you and all of you do, and everyone else who's out there sharing their stories as well. And Ashley, we thank you for letting us join you today. We're excited to be a part of MFC and work together in order to help spread the message.
Absolutely. Hillary, you're a natural. I think your first podcast has gone swimmingly. So great job. And we could sit and we could actually start delving into topics and talk about them all day long. We'll spare that for the length of this podcast, but there's more opportunities to engage on Missouri CommonGround on Facebook, and I'm sure other social platforms, or you can find Common Ground at findourcommonground.com. Lots of consumer facing answers out there. So whether it's the CAFOs that Kaitlin mentioned, or chemicals, or GMOs, or pick a hot topic, it's pretty much at findourcommonground.com as a general briefer, and then the opportunities to connect locally on these other social channels and directly with these ladies. Missouri Farmers Care we will share the Common Ground videos on our socials. So if you want to see those and direct back to Common Ground, please feel free to. We're always trying to tell farm stories. We're making a point this year to amplify farmer voices from across the state. We're telling farm stories from across the state, and there are so many people who want to connect with agriculture, who really want to cheer for us, right? They appreciate their food and the economic impact and just don't have a place to express that appreciation. You can do so and find those stories at Missouri Farmers Care social channels as well. It is such an honor to work with you guys. We appreciate your time and hope that it is just a fantastic spring for everybody on the farm. Keep us updated on, as you say, the baby corns, Addi, and we'll make sure to follow your socials, because I am with Addi. I am not a gardener, Kaitlin, and love to appreciate the efforts of others. I go and support my local gardeners at farmers market because it's not for me. I can grow a lot of cows. I have acres and acres of cows, but no green thumbs on this end either. So it's been a great conversation. Hillary, thanks to you and Missouri Corn. And tune in we're about to wrap season 4 of Stand for Ag with Missouri Farmers Care. As these ladies said, they have just spent time in the capitals. Missouri's legislative session is just about to wrap. So tune in. We're going to talk about, right after the budget has been passed, what happened, what's been passed, and our predictions for that very last tumultuous week of session. And can't wait to see what happens. We hope there's some motion on key agricultural priorities that are pending before the House and Senate that need some action to keep this economic engine revving and see the full potential. So we'll be talking about that next episode. So make sure to tune in. Also visit our show notes so that you can see the links to the past episodes of the Greater Missouri Leadership Challenge and CCAs and the Leopold Conservation Award, a prestigious conservation award in the nation that Addi and Jocelyn have been recipients of. So with that, we will sign off and wish you all the best. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you for joining the Stand for Ag podcast with Missouri Farmers Care. We're excited to bring you new stories each week. We as agriculturalists have a lot of stories to tell. Stories of resilience, grit, and stories of families that are united by their passion for agriculture. Each week, tune in for a new episode and join the conversation.